But it's, again, it's interesting.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I,
Yeah, we'll go back to this big discussion back to order, Jim.
yeah, basically what my concern, and I would hope that the county administration working with the city can work out is kind of try to simplify this as much as they can. I think he's got a sense for what it is we'd like to see done, and to address the issue of the long-term funding, and I think that is true. It's going to have to be appropriated on a year-to-year basis. What's proposed is we have 12 years remaining through 2025 with the tobacco settlement money that generates in the neighborhood of $300,000 a year. And so 200,000 or 2/3 of that would be identified as the primary revenue stream to fulfill this commitment, and that will require the board on an annual basis to make that appropriation. And the concern about what the future may hold, we don't know what the future board will look like, but if you want any sort of reasonable assurance that would help you out, I'm more than prepared if necessary, even though I had other ideas in mind, if I have to stick around and run for 3 more terms to make sure that through 2025 that there will be advocacy and the board taking the right action. Believe me, that is an option in the bridge that I would be prepared to consider at the appropriate
I
time.
bet we could find another option.
I just said that for Mr. Allball's benefit. I realize it probably generated a lot of grins in the audience, and my wife has made it real clear that she would rather go visit national parks and I'm just soon go with her.
Okay. So let's move on.
But in essence, that's the reality. Those of us who are concerned about these issues, that's
It should be 220, not 200.
yeah, 220,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
the question, I think, which Supervisor Vaughn, the question before you, are we gonna write a JPA that allows other members to join? I heard yes and no.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, to me, it seems like, with this JPA, there needs to be a way where each member is all in for 15 years. How could this be the basis? I'm all for dedicating the money, tobacco settlement, I think it's a perfect use of the money. But if you're a 50% partner, as an opt-out option each year, this isn't solid as far as I'm concerned. We're putting in a big commitment, as well I feel we should, but still, you need to be on solid footing, and it doesn't seem like solid footing to me if your half partner can opt out in any year. And I think that's...
Well, theoretically, I guess you could write a JPA agreement that says you signed here, it's like a mortgage,
Yeah,
you're in
exactly,
for 15 years.
exactly.
Now, whether or not that is legal becomes kind of a legal question.
Well, I think that's the
But
first thing.
it also becomes a policy question, as if you're willing to bind, your colleagues here 10 years from now, and in the circumstances that we can't foresee.
But this is serious business, it's not a thing where you could, I changed my mind, this year. No, if the city and county want to do this, first is to agree to the funding. Second is you got to have a strong bond, not just a 12-month bond. Commitment to each other. You need to be in it for the long haul. You need to commit. You need to do whatever you need to make happen. What sort of, I agree with, your analogy and Aaron, as far as the risk factor. You need to be solid. Your partner needs to be solid. You need to be in it for 15 years, not 12 months.
But you can't do that. That's why it has to go back before the voters, so that they're committing. It can't be just
Sort of two separate issues. In terms of whether or not you can legally commit to $2,000 a year for 15 years, that's a separate question we'll discuss later. I think the question here is whether or not the agreement has an out clause, or whether or not you're in it for 15 years, come hell or high water.
The way, I'm one guy, but the way I would author it, if it was my deal, I'd get the 2 strong partners. I'd let it would be great, to have the college and the school and everybody. You don't want this thing to become a huge, giant thing. You want the city and county, the 2 principal players, take input and suggestions from college and school and all that.
So,
but,
so you'd write a JPA agreement that limited the city and the county and made it binding for 15 years.
Exactly, and then,
Yeah,
and the
what's-
question about liability, should the agency be required to indemnify and insure its members, you know, of course, but yeah, I just want the two main players and a commitment.
Well, if I could weigh in on that issue, I think it's important, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate where Mr. Wassick's coming from. And, you know, in the private sector, you can make those kind of contracts and they are binding, the courts will uphold them, and you can commit, you can basically indenture or commit yourself in that fashion. Unfortunately, in the public sector, that option is not one that's even been granted to any governing body. And, you know, the founding fathers and the public has seen fit to retain that authority to the voters. So if you want something of that magnitude, the only way you're going to be able to do it will be to submit whatever agreement you put together that is only provisional year to year, which the two bodies have. And if you want to subjugate it to make it a permanent thing with no wiggle room whatsoever, then you submit it to the voters. And if you can secure the support of the voters and it would be countywide for the county vote, and it'd be citywide for the city vote in terms of the partnership. That's what you'd have to look at in terms of being able to impose it as something where it would override the year-to-year authority that the boards of supervisors have. That's the only way the law allows you to do it. So unlike the public-private sector, the public sector could do that.
Okay, Tony's got an answer for all this, I can tell.
I don't know about an answer to all of it, Tony Jonas. This past weekend, being ignorant about JPAs, I went and researched the very first JPA in the state of California, and then started looking what the meaning and title actually meant. Now, the joint powers is real simple. That is what it is stated. There are three options with the A, and Marty's described two of them here. And with those options comes a great deal of baggage, okay, in the way they're formed. The simplest form is the agreement, which basically sets the board as described in, I think, the same document I got from the city. Okay, is more as a committee, an ad hoc committee, responsible to both these boards and able to utilize the member agencies, resources, financing ability, and those type of things. Once you push into authority, okay, it changes that dynamic, okay, because you have an independent entity, okay, able to contract with member agencies for resources and that type of thing, put an extra burden on the authority. I downloaded a 35-page document put out by the state of California that actually describes all of this. If the council, or excuse me, Board of Supervisors individually don't have this document or doesn't have this document, I thought I had it with me. I'd be happy to reproduce it ×5, give it to the clerk, so you guys maybe have a better understanding of all the ramifications Marty's laying out right now. It's pretty well described and simply explained, enough that I could understand the differences. Without that document and actually how the state of California requires counties or other agencies to put this together, I think we're just grabbing at straws right now. I made it available to Councilman Wilson yesterday, and if you guys would like it, I'd love to get it to you today before we push much
You
further.
have California Constitution and that limit.
Okay, this is even more intense than that document right there.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you, Tony.
you bet.
If I could add one thing to our previous discussion, and what it really boils down to is the court of public opinion as to what the public desires. And I think the ultimate governing, the control on the governing of it all is going to be what the people want. And I get it. There are people who do not want it. And I can tell you, they could be the same people who don't want, Williamson Act, or don't want planning and zoning, don't want building officials, don't want law enforcement, and God forbid, we don't want narcotics drug task force. There are people who don't want certain things, and they make that very clear. And if they're the majority in any given sense, you know, through the ballot box, they elect representatives. So maybe eventually this board is populated by people who are against all of those things, including the pool. And I get it, there are two of you that represent that faction of our community. But we also have to recognize that there are a lot of people who want it, okay? And there are those that now sit on this board who recognize that and represent that interest. And so it's a situation, does the minority opinion control the output of our government decisions? Whether at the national level in terms of national security policy or healthcare policy or whatever, I get it, there are people who don't like it. And if they're the majority, they'll prevail. You know, the majority has the responsibility to respect the rights of the minority, but I guarantee you, the minority does not have the right to veto the majority opinion of the community. And I think that's where I think the future boards, when it comes to allocating and, you know, appropriating the monies under whatever agreement that is put together, is going to determine that. And if it becomes the majority opinion of the community that a pool is not a viable, functioning facility or entity, you know, those dollars will dry up through the representatives that they'll elect to do just
Okay,
that.
thank you, Jim, but for clarification, the statement you made, that two of us are against the pool, I am not against the pool.
Okay, well, I stand corrected.
I'm 100% for a
I'm for
pool.
the pool too, I just don't think the county should be paying for it.
I voted no on a $100 million budget that had a $1.5 million deficit, which I think should be cut. Instead, we added $200,000 to that deficit. That's what I voted no for.
Okay.
I'm 100% for a community pool.
And
Okay.
I disagree with that vote by voting, because I agree with you. I do not like the $1 million in terms of deficit, but I believe that the $10 million that we have in unallocated, unappropriated, undesignated funds that are at our disposal, not only did it take care of the 1.5 million, but it also provided the funding for the 200,000, and where the hemorrhage or the deficit in the budget is generated by a facility that is getting $1.5 million of general fund revenue, serving a handful of kids.
Okay.
That's what we need to fix in the budget.
The deficit, budget we passed, I don't care where you want to take the money, it all comes out of one bucket, you throw the money and you put some of yours in there. The budget we passed had a $1.5 million deficit.
Had more than $1.5 million deficit, because
The budget we passed.
you're subsidizing the juvenile hall by $1.5 million alone.
The question is, that I've got,
On the agenda item.
Larry, then Marty.
all right, the only thing that I know now is you want to form a JPA. So on the question, let's take, if we take a step, do you want to make it possible for other agencies to join?
I would think
As
that's a
written
good
in-
idea in the long term, yeah.
A limited possibility. I'm with Larry. I don't think it should be the primary push of the JPA. And that's how I kind of somewhat see it in this draft document. I think the opportunity should be provided, but I don't think it should be emphasized.
Okay, I see three of you nodding yes, and I don't know if you've been convinced or not, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not steadfast on that too, but I just think the two primary players
Yeah.
need to be the city and county.
I don't expect the other entities to come forward anytime soon, because they don't have any money to contribute.
But I had a question about the money part. Yeah. So what happens in, so say we go into this joint funding that we need to build, this money's gonna service the debt, but say we have a $4 million note, and then one of the partners uses that option to, pull out, then what happens? How does that
The bank forecloses, they own the swimming pool, and then people will be mad.
I
basically?
mean, we'll get into that a little more when we talk about finance options, but
Okay.
basically, a piece of public property gets put up as security, that gets foreclosed on if the debt is paid.
So the other half could just say they give and they quit paying? They don't, they're not-
Let's say in the scenario where you had just a two-member JPA, the city and the
Yeah.
county. The JPA will be the one that actually enters into the debt. And the JPA will make its payments based on the contributions made by its member agency. So if a member agency withdraws and/or refuses to make its contributions, the JPA is still on the hook. So, I mean, theoretically, the one remaining member could put up all the money and keep it going. But if that didn't happen, then they would default on the debt, and the pool theoretically would be seized and sold at auction to pay the bondholder.
So the JPA is really reliant on the citizenry of the.
I intend to get into that in some detail in the next section.
To keep electing the majority.
Okay,
think
move
so.
on.
Okay, the second policy question is, is the one that Supervisor Wassig, is it do you have a get out clause or not?
I think you have to have that clause in there.
Is there a consensus on that?
I don't like it, but I think it's by law, makes it sound like it has a government agency, you have to.
I mean, is that a law?
No, I mean, we could write an agreement, I mean, again, separating the financing, you can't bind the financing, but I think we could probably write a JPA agreement that says you can't get out.
Well, I think you need,
I don't know if that's good public
I think
policy,
you need
but-
to make it relatively difficult. I don't think you just should make it something that can be exercised on a whim. But I think you have to have that provision.
All right, so get out of jail free card is not necessarily free, because on the.
Get out of jail, but it's gonna cost you card.
But what,
Yeah.
I'm curious though, why would you need to have that though, if we're both giving each other?
Well, I tell you, there's nothing certain in life, and I think you have to have, I mean, first of all, I think if it was tested and went to court and you had it so bound that you couldn't, you basically are encumbering future boards in the way. It wouldn't take very long, I think, before a court of law was sorted out, and they would probably render that provision inoperable, because you can't really make it impossible for a future board to make that determination, given the potential of the scenario that Mr. Alvon described earlier. I mean, I don't believe that this scenario is going to be as real, but sometime over the next 15 years, who knows? I mean, 2 years from now, Governor Brown could come in and the legislature, and they could appropriate $90 million of the county's $100 million. What's theirs is theirs, and what's ours is theirs. They've demonstrated it numerous times. And we could be the best managed county in the state. We could be debt-free. We could have all of our liabilities funded, and everything's rosy. And we got $10 million sitting in the bank that we could use to take care of whatever emergencies that come along. And tomorrow they could take that all away, and now you've faced having to fund everything else. And believe me, law enforcement and those kind of things are going to take precedent if we're in that kind of a scenario. And the board at that time has got to have the ability to act in that environment. And if you have it so bound in this agreement where they can't make that choice, I think you'll find that that would be not probably flying law. So that's what you have to have. Whether that's going to happen, I don't think so. But, it's everybody's betting on the future, I guess.
Okay.
So I think there's a consensus, there's a withdrawal clause. The last major policy question is the JPA.
Can I back up for just a second? But I think the withdrawal clause has to be exercised by the governing bodies. It can't be exercised by the members who sit on that JPA board.
No,
which
it is,
how-
the withdrawal ability rests with each member. So if at some point in the future, Lassen County wanted to get out, 90 days before July 1st of any given year, you would have to sit here and make a decision, give notice to JPA, withdraw.
Amending, dissolving, withdrawing, whatever takes place, that has to be done by the governing bodies. It can't be done by the members on the board of the JPA.
I made that note.
Good enough.
The last major policy question, is are we going to require this JPA to indemnify its members, but more importantly, to have the necessary insurance to back up that indemnification? I mean, it doesn't take too much imagination for a horrific accident to happen at a pool. The JPA really doesn't have any assets, and the victim is going to sue both the city and the county. Now, the question of that's going to cost them money. That's money that's going to have to come out of operating expenses and other things to do that. But I would think as a county, as a member, that's a really significant thing that we want to be sure that that's included.
You have to be done, and nobody's gonna sit in the board and they'd be crazy to do it. To me, that's 100%, yes.
But I mean, it's not hard to imagine at some point in the future when, I'm sorry, because we have to pay for all this money for insurance, we can only stay open 3 months this summer.
Well,
That discussion will come up,
Then what it is what it is, if that's what they decide. I mean, you can't have any government agency in
It will be up to the JPA board to sort that out and do it, but I'm with Mr. Pyle. I think that you have to have those kind of assurances in there. That's the purpose of setting up the JPA as a separate entity. If that's not the case, if that's not what we want to do, then we just do it in-house and forget about a JPA.
Okay. I think I have another direction on the JPI. I'll work with Jared and take his input from what the city wanted to change that.
So
Similar
you
to what
haven't, I
said.
think you need to go into the construction
I will.
financing.
I will, and then what we'll do is at some point in the future, we'll come back with a JPA document that will ask what the city.
Kind of a
will pay.
final draft, if you could do that for our first meeting in October, that would be the target I would suggest that we make, and that gives us room to debate, discuss it. We'll have hopefully a full board at that time, and we can decide what we want to do at either that meeting or the following meeting.
The city meets on the first and
They meet
third,
on
right?
the first and third Wednesday, which
So
would
they,
be.
so they would have to have it on their agenda by the first, and us on the eighth, or us on
Yeah.
the eighth and them on the 15th, I
No,
guess.
I would say they would probably take it to his council on the second. I believe that's what he's planning on doing with it.
Yeah.
And then we would take it on the 8th, and then they take it up again on the 16th, and we could take it up again on the 15th.
I'll have the changes made, I have to give Rheta enough time to, absorb it, because she needs to ultimately sign off it from its legal sufficiency. Okay. Now, on the financing issue, that's the second part of this discussion. Proceed with that? Patience to do that? Okay. I mean, I think the basic understanding is we're not gonna save up to build a swimming pool. We're not gonna wait till we've got $400,000 a year saved up for 10 years till we got nothing to build it. So the only way that this pool is gonna be built in the near future is through some sort of debt financing. Absent the JPA going out and getting a vote of the people, the really only realistic alternative to you is what's called a certificates of participation financing, COPS, C-O-P-S. You did that on the jail. The basic concept of a COPS financing is the JPA will be created, and that as a legal entity of government would form a nonprofit corporation under the JPA that would technically end up owning the swimming pool, okay? And the JPA would enter into an agreement with that nonprofit corporation to lease purchase the pool back from them over 30 years, 20, 30 years. The term of that is policy decision. And so technically what you have is you have a lease between the JPA and this new nonprofit corporation. And the people that want to invest in this pool buy certificates of participation in those lease payments. Sounds kind of complicated, but that's technically how it works. And it's a very common financing mechanism. Supervisor Chapman's familiar because that's what you did for the jail here 20 years ago or whatever it was.
25 years.
Just recently got paid off. So that is what's going to happen. Now, the way that works is that you borrow enough money to build a swimming pool and to put enough money into a reserve account to make those payments for 1 year. So if you have a 20-year financing, you borrow 21 years of money. So into this reserve account, let's say the lease payments are $300,000 a year. That $300,000 goes into this reserve account, and that money is there so should the scenario of somebody defaulting, so that the bondholders get paid for that year that it takes them to ultimately foreclose on that piece of property. So that's the structure. Now the problems are going to be are really market ones. How do you get people to invest in building a swimming pool? In order for any of us, any member of the community, to want to invest in that pool, you want to be reasonably secure that the people are going to meet their debts, if they're not going to walk away from it. And so generally, certificates of participation are used for what's called essential public facilities. The market wants to know that you aren't going to walk away from it. An essential public facility would be a jail, a police station, a city hall, well, we aren't the courthouse, is a county building. There will be a question whether or not the market accepts a pool as an essential public facility. That'll be something we'll have to decide as we go through this financing mechanism. But I anticipate that if we go and talk to an underwriter to help us go through this process, they're going to recommend that somebody put up an essential public facility, not the pool, as the security for this debt. So the question becomes, for both the city and the county, are you willing to put up the jail, which is as an example, as security for the debt? Which of course means, if somebody defaulted, let's say we did it as the jail, and then the city decided they didn't want to pay anymore, you're probably gonna pay both shares because you can't afford to lose your jail. Now, so that kind of becomes a question that we need to kind of discuss today as to what our
Well, I
willingness to
think it would
accept.
have to be an asset that both sides are putting in. So it wouldn't be just one asset, it would have to be equal asset in a similar fashion. So like if whether it's City Hall or the Fire Hall or whatever, something of that magnitude, you can't have the asset just be on one side of the equation.
We can discuss that as a policy issue, whether or not we can sell that in the market, whether or not somebody wanted to buy a certificate says they got a foreclose on both the city hall and the jail. Becomes a question of, all this is gonna ultimately affect what you're gonna have to pay for money.
Well, when the COPs were put out for the jail project, we actually had, I think, 3 or 4 county buildings that were put into. The biggest one, or the primary one, was the courthouse itself.
Okay. The city, I'm not real familiar with all their financing, but they have pledged some of their facilities for their debt, I think, on their gas system. And so I don't know what city facilities are really available.
I'm interested in considering it, but until we actually have some concrete, pro and con, there's no way you can answer that question.
But I want you aware of the issue, because when it comes back and it looks like, okay, the only way we're gonna build the swimming pool is if the county puts up its jail, I want to at least have
Why
that
you
conversation.
on the jail, why don't you use the juvenile hall or something?
So we're not gonna own that anymore.